Developing at this hour, unheard of and unprecedented public demonstrations against the Cuban communist government on the Caribbean island. Bold defiance to the government's tight grip on everything there. And President Biden says the U.S. is standing with the people of Cuba, following some of the largest anti-government demonstrations they've seen in decades.
The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights, and we call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence and their attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba.
And Ryan is standing by with former U.S. Senator Mel Martinez, who himself fled Cuba when he was just 12 years old. Gentlemen.
Amy, thanks. Former Senator Mel Martinez joining us. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, real pleasure to be with you.
So,
Thanks
Senator,
for having me.
This story is so personal for you. I mean, when you look at what's happening and when you look at what you went through, what goes through your mind?
Well, look, first of all, it's something that I've dreamed of all my life. You know, as a child, I left Cuba. I was actually 15. But, you know, coming to this country and living in freedom all of these years and having the opportunity to have an education and build a family and, you know, prosper in life, you only yearn that opportunity to live in freedom. For me, to run for office and to be elected almost to one of the highest offices in our land, the United States Senate, these are unheard of opportunities for the Cuban people. So what goes through my mind is, I just want them to have the opportunities I have had, for them to live in freedom, for them to have their aspirations fulfilled, for a parent, I'm now a grandparent, to have the opportunity to see in their children and their grandchildren the fulfillment of their dreams, just to be able to live in peace, to build a family, to build a foundation for financial success for themselves and for those around them, to get an education that doesn't have to be constrained by the dictates of the communist government. So basically, I just want freedom for the Cuban people, and it was encouraging to see their actions. It's obviously sad to see the repression and the brutality of the police and the Cuban authorities as they have tried to crack down on these folks. Hundreds of arrests now, and you know, in addition to that, a lot of fear. But I thought the courage was incredible, and we need to stand with them. And I was encouraged by President Biden's words. I thought they were supportive and encouraging, and I think that's just terrific.
Senator, we've been seeing video from here in Orlando. It's not just in Cuba. We've seen protests, maybe like we've not seen them before in Florida. How proud does that make you, and how big a difference could that make?
Well, it does make me very proud, because, you know, what it shows is that there's a tremendous amount of solidarity, not only by Cuban Americans, but by the American people writ large for the people of Cuba. You know, we're so close geographically to Cuba that we understand the plight of the Cuban people. I've always felt like there was a tremendous kinship, myself as a Cuban American, with people who have an affinity and affection for Cuba, who travel there, who understand what we who fled there have gone through, and the opportunity that lies ahead. You know, I want to mention two things that my successor in the Senate, Marco Rubio, mentioned on a beautiful Senate speech he gave last night. One is that the only place in the world where Cubans are not successful is inside of Cuba. And that's because their system doesn't work. Socialism, communism does not work. The second thing I think is important that he mentioned is that the president ought to be very clear with the Cuban government that they need not start another mass migration like they did with Mariel in 1980 and again in 1994, and even as far back as 1965. There have been, any time the Cuban government feels constrained by the people's demands, they encourage mass migration. We cannot let that not be allowed to happen. And as Senator Rubio said yesterday on the Senate, it ought to be clear to the Cuban government that we would consider that a hostile act.
Senator, I want to finish with this. What needs to happen for change to occur? Obviously, that is a complex question, but in your mind, what needs to happen for the change you want to happen in Cuba?
Well, I think the forces of repression in Cuba need to understand that they are going to be judged by their actions against the Cuban people. I think the Cuban people are showing courage. I think they'll continue to show courage. I think we need to make it clear to the authorities in charge that they will be held accountable, that there's no impunity in these days of instant communication. Even though they've cut off internet, they can't do that forever. And all that happens in Cuba will be known, and to allow the Cuban people to express themselves and have a better life.
Former U.S. Senator Mel Martinez, always love having you on the program. Senator, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you.